Chapter 10. Anna was doing the dishes as she watched the night storm rage outside her kitchen window. She could see the palm fronds in the yard leaning to one side as far as they could stretch. Every now and then a lightning bolt would light up the entire outdoors, and she could see the neighbors' backyard plants suffering the same weathering. Hurricane season was long over, but the conditions out there were rivaling the worst of those that had come along in the past summer. Even though it was intense and invigorating, there was also a relaxing quality in it as well. She was warm and safe inside her house, watching the storm as safely out the window as if she were watching it on television. Her entertainment system was nice, but the surround sound was nowhere near as powerful as the thunder that was booming loud enough to shake the windows in their frames. Still, she felt snug to have such a secure shelter. The house could take it, and so could the neighbors. They all went through much worse every year. Her boyfriend Stan was off visiting his ailing father in Vero Beach. She hated the area. She thought the people down there were even screwier than the ones around where she lived. She wondered if it was so weird down there because it was one of the points of the Bermuda Triangle. She was glad not to be there. Her and Stan never really spent too much time apart, but the situation with his father made it inappropriate for her to tag or be dragged along. She didn't really like Stan's dad, but she hoped he would be all right. He was in his late 70s, and they never were around for too much longer after that. She couldn't think of when it would be a convenient time for Stan to deal with the grief of his father's passing. She hoped his dad would pull through his bout of walking pneumonia and give a little more time for life to go on in its comfortable and usual state. She feared that Stan was going to come back with the old man, who only spoke Spanish, and their house would become his hospice. He was a nice enough fellow in small doses, but that would be a huge strain. In a way, she was relieved that her parents had died off years ago in a car accident. It had been a terrible thing to go through at the time. She had felt like the last lingering shred of the foundation of her life had been ripped out from under her, and she had so much guilt over their distant relationship that had never improved. They had lived close together, but they had been oceans apart emotionally. She was kind of glad that she had never gotten to see them get to an age of total deterioration. It was kind of a blessing in its own way. Life had turned out to be just fine after a lot of years of hardships. She lived in a house that was just shy of being a mansion. There were 4 bedrooms, even though it was just the 2 of them. Some nights they slept apart, so that used up 2 of the bedrooms. Another one had become more of a closet for her incredible amount of clothes and shoes. That only left 1 more available, and that was to be the guest room, even though they had never had a guest stay over since she had moved in with him a few years back. Even though it was a large house, they managed to fill it up just fine. It was perfect for the 2 of them, and she never imagined she would get to live in a place so luxurious. She wondered if Stan was okay. He was driving down there, and she began to picture the car skidding out of control from the storm and having a head-on collision with a truck. She could see the truck's headlights swell up in the rain and turn the whole world white. Just as she was envisioning Stan's life ending, the lights over the kitchen sink flickered. Then there was another blindingly bright flash of lightning that was immediately followed by a boom of thunder that almost made her jump out of her skin. She felt like the epicenter of the storm was right over the house. She then considered if the epicenter of a storm was like the eye of a hurricane, and if that meant it should be calm inside the swirling center. It didn't matter, though. She wasn't a superstitious person, but she thought of herself as an intuitive one. She began to ponder if the lights flickering while she imagined Stan's death was some kind of omen. She then thought against it. That was silly. He was dozens of miles away and was probably having perfect weather where he was. He would call her when he got there to let her know that he arrived all right. That felt more accurate than the car crash. That felt more like what was going to happen. Since the last thunderclap that almost boxed her ears, her mood had taken quite a considerable downturn. She had gone from feeling secure and warm while weathering the storm to feeling paranoid that it was going to come and rip her home to rubble and leave her standing in the elements completely exposed. The lights flickered again. It felt like they were toying with her. Then they went out altogether. She was alone in the dark house. She hadn't been alone in a long time. Stan was always around, or she was at her part-time job as a volunteer at the zoo. She did that mostly for fun and for something to do. Stan would not allow animals in the house, but she was an animal lover at heart, and that was a way she got to be close to them without being totally responsible for them. She realized the faucet was still running. She rinsed the soap suds off her hands and turned off the tap. The house was quiet, except for the sounds from the storm outside that felt like they were creeping their way inside. Suddenly there was a loud crash and the sounds of breaking glass from somewhere down the hall. She cried out as it happened. The commotion stopped, and so did her involuntary vocal spasm. The sound of the storm seemed to be louder. An ear-piercing beeping soon drowned it out. It was the security alarm. It was going off, and she was wincing from the decibels it was putting out. She was not so much scared as she was irritated by it. It was causing her ears real pain. She clumsily made her way through the darkened house, occasionally bumping into furniture that hadn't been rearranged since she moved in. It felt like the chairs and tables were lunging out at her whenever she hit them. She cussed under her breath. A flash of lightning lit up the house through the sliding glass doors in the living room, and she briefly saw her path to the front door. The flash was over as quickly as it had come, but she had marked her way in the instant that she could see. Thunder came abruptly after, but she felt it more than she heard it over the alarm. She could see the tiny light on the alarm's keypad that was normally green had turned red. That had made it harder to see it in the dark. She quickly ran up to it and yelled out as a table leg that supported a potted plant collided with her shin. She barely heard her own voice. She punched in the code and the alarm halted. She sighed in relief. She knew that she needed to light a candle. The batteries in the flashlight had died, and she had meant to replace them by the time the next hurricane season rolled around. That night storm was a fluke. She had to make her way back to the kitchen. There were tea candles and glasses on the counter, and a lighter in the drawer by the stove. She took her first steps to retrace her path when a sharp pain stabbed her right foot. She gasped. There was another fast flash of light from outside, and she saw she had stepped in the broken flower pot that had fallen off of the table and shattered on the floor. She had not even heard it fall over that goddamned alarm. A ceramic shard had punctured her heel before her foot had come down on the dirt that was in clumps around the aloe plant on the tiled floor. She sighed again, but in anger. She limped her way back to the kitchen, walking on the ball of her injured foot. She felt like she was leaving a trail of blood behind her. She would clean it all up when the lights came back on, and way before Stan came home. She rummaged through the kitchen drawer until she found the lighter. She turned the flint with her thumb and illuminated the area around her. She was surprised how much she could see from such a small flame. The lighter was heating up quickly. She touched the flame to one of the candle's wicks and let go of the button that her thumb was pressing to let the lighter cool off. The candlelight was not nearly as bright. A dull blue flame glowed softly. The pinch of fire began to burn the dust off the wick and the wax. It crackled and let off a slight odor. The flame began to yellow and get brighter. It never achieved the same level of brightness as the lighter, even shining through the glass, but it was easier to carry around and wouldn't burn her thumb off. She carried the candle through the house. She could see in a small, circular area around her that moved with her. Her shadow danced on the wall beside her. She parted her way through the darkness like she was making her way through a thick fog. Everything that was immediately around her she could see clearly enough. The bright lightning flashes were helpful, but she did not need them as much anymore. There would be no more bumps and bruises and gashes. She had made her way toward the breaking sound she had heard. 2 of the bedrooms were down the hallway. The other 2 were upstairs. It had sounded close, like it had happened on the ground floor. She went into the hall and opened the door on her right and looked in. Everything was in order in there. She hoped she had stopped the alarm before it had called the police. She was pretty sure she had punched in the code within the minute that was allowed before they were summoned. That was all she needed, for Stan to come back after the one time he had left her alone, and the police had been called to soothe a hysterical woman through a savage storm. She would just feel ridiculous. She was pretty sure they would call the house phone line to check in that they had been notified. Just because the power was out didn't mean the phone was out, too. She would check to make sure of that after she found out what all the hoopla had been. She checked the other bedroom on the opposite side of the hall. There it was. The window had been smashed. There was broken glass all over the floor. The wind was howling into the bedroom, blowing in some rain that was dampening the carpet under the glass. It was a mess. She limped over to the mini-disaster area, being careful not to step in the glass shards. The soggy carpet squished under her toes. It felt disgusting. She leaned her head to look out the window, and she saw the culprit. A branch had broken off of a nearby tree and had been blown right into the glass. It was lying on the ground just outside. She had no idea how to fix it, even temporarily. She put her hand to her mouth while she thought about what to do. Then it hit her. She was proud of herself. Stan would be proud too when he saw how resourceful she was. She would cut up a cardboard box and cover the entire window with it and seal it all around the edges with packing tape to make it airtight. She would not leave the house until a professional properly fixed it. She would look one up in the phone book. The window was in the back of the house, so no one would notice. She began to wonder how she could sleep in a house that had been compromised. She removed the negative thoughts from her head. It would be fine. No one driving by would be able to tell. She would take a Valium to help relieve her anxiety and help her sleep. She would lock her bedroom door. That door was very secure, and she would be safe, and all their possessions were insured, even against theft and vandalism. She had her cell phone, too. She could call from inside the safety of the bedroom if anything sounded funny. She would call even if it turned out to be something foolish like another broken window in the storm. That happening twice seemed incredibly unlikely. Everything would be fine. She would take care of her foot after she finished caretaking for the house. A lot more rain and wind had come in, even in the short time that she had been in the room. She would have to prevent any further damage straight away. She turned to begin her clever task when her candle lit up the face of the crazed, wet man that had been standing right behind her. Her scream was drowned out by another roar of thunder.